So you've fallen down the rabbit hole. You're binge watching the TV shows, listening to the biggest pop bands, eating the food, buying the tech, and even learning the language. Well, you're far from alone. From Canada to Iraq, Korean culture is conquering the world. So how do we all end up surfing the Korean wave?
Everybody associates it with K-pop now, but it really started with K-dramas. My name is Crystal Anderson, and I am affiliate faculty in the Department of African and African American Studies here at George Mason University. And right now I'm focusing my research on K-pop. These were high production dramas that Korea produced that they then exported to both Japan and China. And both Japan and China have, bustling popular culture industries, but there was something very different about those particular K-dramas that caught the attention of both audiences. And it's against that backdrop that you then get what some people describe as Hallyu 2.0, which is a more broader spread of Korean popular culture.
The K-wave didn't arrive overnight. It was decades in the making, but it almost never reached us, because at one point in Korea's history, its culture was on the verge of being wiped out. In the early 20th century, the Korean peninsula was occupied by Japan. And during this time, the Korean language was banned, schools were shut down, the teaching of Korean history outlawed, and Korean-owned newspapers were pulled from circulation. Instead, Koreans were forced to adopt Japanese names, the language, culture, and even religion.
As you know, South Korea went through Japanese colonization. And as a native Korean, I'm proud that South Korea was able to maintain their culture and language throughout the colonialism, because a lot of culture actually lost the significant part of their culture, including architecture, language, and a lot of cultural forms were destroyed. And music and dance are especially subject to be destroyed because it is not always relying on written document, especially dancing before the modern visual archive and all those technologies.
Korea survived after Japan was defeated by the Allies in World War II. But this didn't lead to Korea's liberation. Instead, it was occupied again, but this time by the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south. The US also replaced Japan as the main cultural influence in South Korea. It made English the official language. And through the military's radio service, its dance halls and movie theaters, Koreans were introduced to American jazz and Hollywood. Following the Korean War in 1953, the peninsula was formally divided. But the post-war recovery was painfully slow. South Korea's government was plagued by corruption, industrial development was limited, and it relied heavily on financial aid from the United States. Korea's economy was in worse shape than the Democratic Republic of Congo. The future was uncertain. Then in 1961, this guy came onto the scene. This is Park Geun-hye. He came to power after launching a military coup and later made himself president. And like most dictators, Park ruled with an iron fist. Civil liberties and freedom of expression were restricted. Any political opposition was crushed. But it was under Park's leadership that South Korea's economy would undergo one of the most dramatic transformations in history. The government invested heavily in industries such as shipbuilding, steel, and electronics. And in exchange for Seoul's support for the Vietnam War, the US opened its doors to Korean products. By the 1970s, family-owned conglomerates, thanks to state backing, began to flourish, which saw the rise of companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. A year after Park came to power, South Korea's GDP was just $2.7 billion, but by 1989, this grew to a massive $230 billion. Today, that figure has reached more than $1 trillion, making South Korea one of the largest economies on Earth.
It is quite common to see the alliance between the economic prosperity with cultural flow. Like think about the heyday of American pop music. Still is, and also the heyday of Japanese pop music in the 1980s and 1990s, and also the Hong Kong cinema. So when a culture, a nation is thriving economically, there's a naturally more chance to flourish when it comes to its culture. So I think South Korea is now thriving, economically and therefore culturally, or vice versa.
In 1980, Park's successor, Chun Do-hwan, introduced a policy that became known as the 3 S's: sports, sex, and screen. Historians say the intention was to distract the public from more serious issues like politics and to prevent protests against his authoritarian government. Chun encouraged the development of sports leagues, news media, and cinema, and he relaxed censorship laws, which led to a rise of Korean TV dramas and movies. The Korean wave was starting to swell. In the 1990s, there were signs that Korea's entertainment industry was beginning to have a wider appeal outside of the country and the region. The 1993 film Siet Yonye was the first domestically made movie that sold more than 1 million tickets, which was impressive since it was screened in only 3 theatres in Seoul. It was also shown in the US and across Europe and achieved critical acclaim, winning awards at Cannes and the Berlin Film Festival. There was also the boy band H.O.T., considered to be the first K-pop idol group. The band was created by the agency SM Entertainment in 1996 and would go on to sell more than 6 million records and achieve fame in China and Japan. H.O.T. even performed alongside the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson. The group's success was a turning point and became a model for the K-pop bands that followed. South Korea's government began to change its tune on the entertainment industry. Instead of censoring content which it did in the past, it began to actively promote popular culture. In 2000, a Chinese newspaper described the rising popularity of Korean entertainment as Hallyu, which literally means Korean wave. This was in response to how pervasive Korean pop culture became in Asia. But the K-wave was about to ripple across the globe. Korean pop singer Psy shook the music world with his 2012 mega hit Gangnam Style, and the video for the song was the first to reach 1 billion views on YouTube. Gangnam Style did what no other Korean pop song had done before. It broke into the notoriously exclusive US music market and introduced the world not only to K-pop, but also to all things Korean. Although a catchy song, most fans might have missed the subtle messages in Psy's lyrics. Gangnam is the name of the wealthiest district of South Korea and has been described as the mecca of high consumption. The song is a critique of the supposed shallow and materialistic culture of Gangnam and the people that live there. Gangnam is also home to hundreds of clinics offering cosmetic surgery. Tourists from across Asia and other parts of the world would travel to South Korea for the purpose of plastic surgery or to buy the latest beauty products. Many were inspired by their favorite actors on Korean TV shows. Korea is now known for defining modern beauty standards. The themes explored in Gangnam Style of economic inequality and class divisions would return again, but this time with a much darker tone. The world was hooked on Parasite and Squid Game. The former would win the Best Picture Oscar at the Academy Awards, and the latter became the #1 show in more than 90 countries on Netflix. So after being invaded and occupied by multiple countries, it's now Korea that's dominating the world through its popular culture. In 2020, the British magazine Monocle ranked South Korea second in the world for its soft power, behind Germany. Soft power was a term coined in the 1980s by the American political scientist Joseph Nye. It's defined as the ability of a country to persuade others to do what it wants without force or coercion. Soft power is also used by states to attract allies and supporters. Some journalists have written about how the K-wave, or Hallyu, was a deliberate policy of Korea's government to export its culture, and as a projection of soft power. But how accurate is this?
I think that because of the unpredictable way that it's been traveling around the globe, it's not the result of this really kind of, secret plan that the South Korean government has to promote their culture. They certainly do have subsidies for some of the entertainment agencies, and they, like any other country, will have like grants or things that promote culture, but the level and the penetration that we've seen in global destinations is not one I think that the South Korean government planned for, and is largely responsible for, actually.
So what's the future for K-culture outside of South Korea and Asia? Is it just another trend, or is it here to stay?
If every other wave before it is any indication, it is going to subside, because that's what waves do. So I think the more interesting question is, what does that look like? If you have been a person who's been involved in Korean popular culture, and one of the things that I've found in my research is that people who became K-pop fans had probably been a fan of some other Asian popular culture, whether it was anime or whether it was Bollywood, that made that transition over to K-pop easier. So the subtitles and the language barrier just never bothered them. So you always, I think, are going to have that subculture group of people. I think the real question is, what kind of legacy will K-pop or the K-wave have once it recedes? And whether people will kind of look back at this moment and remember that this kind of, influx of Korean popular culture happened, and also whether we're going to continue to have interest on the part of South Korea to specifically target Western countries.